whole world is reverberating because of Trump's win. And one of the places where I think that will dominate discussion, of course, the World Economic Forum in Switzerland, which we always attend, they'll be feasting on this. They'll be appalled by it. They'll be gagging on it. Donald Trump is a threat to everything they have to say and do. It. Yuval Noah Harari said that. We played that clip a couple of times. But right now, in the country of Azerbaijan in Central Asia, in the city of Baku, very exotic, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, their annual conference of the parties, is coming together. In other words, the UN's global warming conference that attracts thousands of delegates from around the world to hatch schemes on how to carbon tax this and net zero that. Well, they are meeting, and it's got to be under a dark cloud. That meeting starts in just a couple of days. And joining us is a man who goes to all of those meetings with a skeptical eye. He is en route to Baku right now. We caught him as he passes through Istanbul, Turkey. I suppose that's how you get to Azerbaijan. You know who I'm talking about, our friend Mark Morano, the boss of ClimateDepot.com. Mark, it's great to see you. We've got you between flights. You're passing through Istanbul. Yes. Very exotic. You're dressed like you're going on safari, and you've got a big smile on your face. I think I know why. You had the same smile in 2016 when Donald Trump was first elected. Tell me what you expect to see at the Global Warming Conference that you're visiting in a couple days.
Well, this is, I can't suppress the smile. This is Donald Trump's election in 2024 is one of the most consequential elections ever when it comes to the UN Sustainable Development and Climate Change agenda. And it's not just because of Donald Trump. And it's, I guess the best way to explain this of why I'm so excited to head to Azerbaijan, and I leave in 36 hours from Istanbul to go to Baku, is if you think back in the United States, we had for decades the left, everyone from AOC talking about defunding the police. What a great idea. George Soros funded all these prosecutors in American cities. Finally, George Floyd happens in 2020 in June. And every major U.S. city went full bore on defunding the police. It was a complete, utter disaster. They had virtue signaled for decades. Nothing happened because they didn't officially do it. They finally went all in. Every city was in chaos, collapse. Within a year, Joe Biden's at the State of the Union announcing it's time to refund the police. It was a political disaster for American progressives. The same thing is happening in real time, independent of Donald Trump, with the net zero UN climate agenda. From energy rationing through Europe fighting back, the EU elections, the Netherlands farmers, the Polish parliament fighting back, the UK showing signs of life fighting the net zero agenda, every major corporation pushing back on the EVs, from BMW to Mercedes to Chrysler, all across the board. CEOs can't even hold this together, even though they're in corporate government collusion. And of course, you have the rest of the climate agenda, from the food rationing to the climate to the entire 15-minute cities. Everyone seems to be in revolt across the world. Enter Donald Trump. His election might just be the gentle shove. Not that I think Donald Trump's going to be gentle. I think it's going to be a heave-ho, but it's at a time that only God could have created in this period of history. The agenda is in shambles, not because they failed in some weird way, but because they actually started implementing the wacky virtue signaling thing that they've talked about for decades. And people in real time, just like defund the police, are seeing the disaster. Donald Trump is now in, and the U.S. is going to accelerate this collapse of net zero. It is a wonderful thing to behold. I'm calling COP29 in Azerbaijan the funeral for the demented net zero ideology.
I agree with you that it's a funeral, but the thing about the UN is they're like the undead. They'll continue
they are.
because they get paid to go to these annual reunions.
Yes.
There's been more than 20 of them so far. It's like an annual get-together with all your buddies, in another setting. And Baku is a little more exotic sometimes. They were in Paris a few years ago, they were in Bali and Kyoto. What a way to see the world. So even though the ideas are dead, these zombies will continue pushing it. But you've made me think, Mark, I think you're exactly right. I mean, what was one of the lessons of Ukraine is that if we don't develop our own oil and gas, we're at the mercy
Yes.
of Russia and OPEC. I mean, that's where Qatar got its money to fund Hamas. I think the UK right now, they're talking about defunding seniors who needed a bit of a top up to pay for their heat in the winter. Your point about the farmers' revolt in the Netherlands. So even before Trump, you're so right. Even before Trump, I think the world was tiring of the imposed, planned energy poverty of the net zero movement. But really, Donald Trump is he's gonna collapse the whole thing. It's like this hot air balloon that's just gonna pop. I mean, you're not there yet. You're en route there. But what do you expect? What do you expect the local hosts to say? What do you expect the agenda to be? It's almost like, well, I think the analogy would be Kamala Harris's election night party. I mean, people are gathering, but they're going to be somber. In that case, Kamala Harris didn't even give a speech. Like, do you think people will actually maybe even cancel their trip to Baku? Like, what is even the point of the gathering?
First of all, I'm in Istanbul. We just had our waiter tell us tonight, Donald Trump is good. We met many cab drivers, many citizens here. Turkey seems to love Donald Trump. They have a nationalist streak here, and maybe they recognize that in Donald Trump. I don't know. But what's fascinating is when you go back to 2016. Now, remember, in 2016, I showed up in Marrakesh, Morocco. And you know well, because Rebel News covered this at the time. You're one of the few reporters that were there. I gave you guys the inside scoop, and then it later ended up on CNN every half hour in a loop, Associated Press. I started shredding the UN Paris Agreement with a red MAGA hat on and a Donald Trump cutout. Now, the media was kind of like, oh, this is silly, because all the momentum was for net zero at the time in the UN climate process. It really was. But they know now, fast forward 8 years, that agenda is in collapse, whether it's Canada, well, somewhat in Canada, or whether it's all through Europe. Again, the EU elections in June were a major pushback. And you see what's happening in New Zealand and Australia, hopefully coming together to fight this. So now Donald Trump reemerges here to push this. We already have Senator Bernie Sanders, the night before the election, perhaps sensing a Trump win, announced that the quote, the global struggle against climate change is over if Donald Trump's elected. Gore sent out an email saying basically he was depressed. Al Gore saying, oh, well, this is like a major setback in civil rights, comparing himself to Martin Luther King, like the fight must go on. They're delusional. This is not a fight that can go on because it's demented. It's anti-human. It's not working. None of the promises that they made about solar and wind being cheaper and taking over and fossil fuels being none of it's true. EVs can't take over. In the U.S., we are barely at 7% of electric vehicle sales, despite mandates, subsidies, corporate government collusion. There's no there. Na, 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 na. Hey, hey, hey. Goodbye. And they know that. Their worst nightmare is to have the leader of the free world, Donald Trump, and a different Donald Trump from 8 years ago. This is the Donald Trump who is completely dropped all the stupid rhetoric about, well, Paris isn't the best deal, we'll renegotiate. He's gone. That Donald Trump of 2016 is gone. The establishment appointees aren't coming back. This is their worst nightmare because the United States of America is going to be pushing further to the demise of net zero.